All right. Welcome to this week's episode of Live Office Hours. Casey, how's everything going?
Things are good. Yeah, it was a great day to start here in Boston, but the sun's coming out and
Nice.
recovering from a brief sickness. So yeah, things are trending upwards. Excited to jump into some stuff today.
Yeah. Casey ended up catching a cold, and then I called it this morning. So we're just going to power through. It's going to be awesome. If you haven't seen, as we're waiting for everybody to start jumping in here, we appreciate everybody doing so. The announcement we've kind of been teasing up until recently, and of course it happens, on Thursday, not on Wednesday, so we couldn't talk about it last week, is the ScanPower integration. So let me share my screen here so we can revel. Here we go. So released an awesome new integration with ScanPower. If you go to goor.com/blog, you will find that there's the second most recent blog post. Have an awesome video announcing it with Paul Rutherford, one of the co-founders there. Just kind of talking about how we're pushing for more of an ecosystem in the Amazon software space, right? Historically, a lot of what's happened is you have a lot of very small, super niche tools, or the all-encompassing, we do everything. But for me, that's a jack of all trades, master of none kind of philosophy, which is kind of frustrating as a seller. And so we said, okay, well, what's the in between? Well, the in between is amazing integrations. There's partnerships here. And so it's not just we technically integrated, although we did that. It's also developing a deeper relationship with one another as developers so that we can say, great, like, how can we support one another? How do we say, well, what's the overlap here? What's the Venn diagram that we could, if we focus on that, we could add tremendous amounts of additional value that we otherwise just could not do. And so this is an awesome integration. It's one of many. We have many more. We actually have another announcement that I can't talk about because it's coming out tomorrow. So we have another announcement coming out tomorrow. But what's so cool about this, and we talk about this in the announcement video on the page, the ScanPower team is phenomenal. They didn't just say, hey, yeah, let's integrate. They said, well, how can we make this better? They added new functionality. They allowed us to be able to import mins and maxes from ScanPower because some people do like to set them manually. We don't recommend it, but I get it, right? And it's super fast. The Inventory Lab integration, I think we only can do that once every 24 hours. ScanPower, we're doing this every 15 minutes, and we can actually speed that up if we need to. So we're trying to find that balance there. But you're able to get your costs, your mins, and your maxes, which is phenomenal. And you get to decide in the configuration which of those three, if not all three, do you want to import. Maybe you only want to do your costs or only the mins, or maybe just the cost and the mins and leave the maxes up to Maven as an example. You can do that now really fast, really well. So it's a phenomenal thing, but they went a step further and they said, hey, we really like this idea of the early stage program you launched. So we basically replicated it. As I love it. That's great. They basically said, we just took it word for word. Hope that's okay. It's $27. So if you're in Aura as an early stage user, you get access to that if you want it. If you're switching from another tool, they'll comp you on that as well. So it's basically $27 a month for the whole thing for up to 12 months. And you get access to ScanPower, which is incredible. I mean, that's so stupidly cheap. And so what's so cool about this, Casey, is like Aura used to start at 97 for one tool, right? You didn't have access to Hyperdrive, Maven, mobile, none of that. Now, for 27 times 2, I got a sick brain, so I'm not doing the math. For less than $100, less than $97, you get access to 2 tools that also integrate. Think about how we can scale this out, more integrations, more deeper relationships. And this is something we've been harping on a lot lately, which is how can you develop that ecosystem? And I call it the modern, software ecosystem, because the way things have been done in the Amazon software space historically have just not been this way. There hasn't been deep relationships. There's been transactional relationships in the sense of, if you promote me, I'll promote you. But like, what does that do for the end user? Well, nothing. We're just swapping users. We're trying to grow, which is like awesome, right? I'm all here for growth, right? But if you can grow through adding additional value, that's where amazing things can occur. And we're starting this process. We have a lot more in store. We have so much we're working on the back end that a lot of people don't know about, which is exciting for me. So yeah, really awesome stuff. So check that out. Again, goora.com/blog. This week's blog, I actually talked about something very similar, which is like the modern financial stack for sellers, because a lot of sellers are using like regional banks that like you can't get anything done in a timely fashion, and like all these other legacy tools that don't even integrate. And so when it comes time to doing taxes and P&L, they're just like, oh my gosh, I have to give this to a VA. Anytime somebody says I'm giving this to a VA, I want to pause and say, but could code do this for you better, right? And so what I did is I actually highlighted some of the best financial tools that all, funny enough, integrate with one another. So one of the first ones is Finaloop. This is a really cool tool, actually. So it's accounting software, but for e-commerce companies. So they have actual like the bookkeeping, regular kind of stuff, but then they have services, which is really cool. So you can actually be like, hey, I want you to do my bookkeeping, not just like give me the software to do it. Like you do it, you do the P&L, you do all these things. Really cool stuff. They have tons of integrations. Again, integrations. I think if you're looking for new software, you need to think about what do they integrate with that I already use, or should I switch to? So this is like the focal point. We talk about banks. I know it sounds so sexy, but most banks are so boring. And actually, we switched to a bank called Mercury, and they recently announced they're coming out with personal banking. So I'm on the wait list, waiting to get off on that. But Mercury is fantastic. It integrates with all these different things, including Finaloop, right? You got, and what's nice is actually you can set up the profit first methodology, because Profit First by Mike Michalowicz basically should suggest you have these all your income for the business, you break it down into percentages, and you send those to specific accounts, right? 30% goes to my tax account, 10% goes to my profit account. What's nice about Mercury is you can create these automated rules to say whenever money comes in, send 10% to this sub account. And they're all sub accounts, by the way, in your Mercury account. And they give you interest rates. Yeah, I think it's like 5%, which is pretty good. At least that's on the personal banking side. I forget what the interest rate is on the business side. But either way, you could basically automate a lot of this transactional moving money around if that's the methodology you follow, which I know a lot of sellers do. And we talk about like numeral for sales tax, like state sales tax, right? A lot of people know TaxJar used to use it, but numeral is kind of like the more modern version. And again, all these things integrate with Finaloop. So cool blog posts. It's not super lengthy, as you can tell. I try not to write content that is so overwhelming and like give you every version of everything I could ever answer. And it's more just like, listen, here's what's up. Here's what I think you should take a look at. And like, you're good to go here. We don't need to belabor the point for all eternity. I can't stand. I know a lot of people try to write blog posts at like 5,000 words. I'm like, that sounds horrible. If it could have been 800, right? Like, don't waste my time. So yeah, good way to kind of start that. Lots of good stuff there. So
yeah,
nice.
Yeah, it's great to see us kind of like get more to that ecosystem feel and community, like you mentioned. And I think we mentioned in previous office hours that a lot of times barrier to entry for a lot of tools for Amazon sellers and just sellers across lots of different spaces is going to be price. So making that offer for the early stage, and then also ScanPower's entry level pricing as well. Really just making it accessible, and then your subscription will grow as your business grows. So you don't have to pay what you can't afford initially. And as you grow and then can create more revenue, then we're going to grow with you. So really just a win-win, helping you grow the overall bottom line there.
Yeah, it's not just creating the ecosystem, it's designing the ecosystem to be accessible as early as possible, right? I've always said that the Amazon business is very easy to get started with, but more difficult to scale and succeed with. Why? Because you're building an actual business, but there's no limitations. There's no hurdles really to jump. I mean, you could just create an account in 10 minutes and technically you're a seller, right? So our whole thing is, it's not just about making successful sellers more successful, although that's certainly part of it. It's how do we as a company, as an industry, increase the success rate here? Well, a lot of times it's getting started with the right things early enough. And there's been a lot of price kind of limitations. And so we're getting rid of that, which is, really the big push for early stage, right? It's like, let's make the software accessible. Let's make the technology, like the cutting edge stuff like Maven AI and Hyperdrive, also accessible for those brand new sellers. You shouldn't have to wait to earn through your revenue this cutting edge stuff when you can actually get value from it now. There was a question from Dylan here. Do you know Finaloop's pricing? I know you mentioned in the comments you already saw it, but just to highlight it, it is revenue based, so it's a sliding scale. They look at basically your gross total revenue for the year. So you basically put that in your sliding scale and it tells you what you're going to pay per month. It's not the cheapest thing in the world. They do kind of highlight that they're still cheaper than a traditional bookkeeping kind of solution, which I would pretty much agree with, although there's other ones like Pilot. We use Pilot, although that's more for like subscriptions and stuff like that. But this is, and I kind of highlight this actually in the blog post. Some of these things you're like, why in the world am I paying for this? It's such a waste of capital. It's not. It's a cost of doing business. And it's one of those things that if you pay a little bit more upfront, it ends up saving you a lot of either time or money, whatever, later when it matters, right? So like the tax jar, numerals kind of thing, it just feels like a complete waste of money until you got to file all these things. And you're like, oh, good, all the data's here. I don't need to deal with that. You did the heavy lifting. You saved me, 50 something hours. That's worth the $60 I paid per month or whatever it happens to be. See, Jalil, I'm still being charged the essential price, even though I submitted info for the early stage pricing. How do I go about getting my pricing reviewed? So basically what we do is we review daily the applications. If you're under the threshold, we'll approve you there. So I would say reach out to support, and that way we can take a look at your actual subscription, see what's going on there. It could be that you don't qualify for whatever reason. We'll let you know, hey, here's why. If there's a mishap, we'll definitely get that corrected for you.
Yep. Yeah, I would recommend jumping into chat there, Jaleel. Finn should be running the chat since I'm on the call now, but he should
Yep.
be able to get you sorted pretty quickly there.
Exactly. So there's a lot of interest in Finaloop. That's funny. I love that. I love being able to expose new software to the industry. So you do not need A2X for this. What's amazing about Finaloop is all their integration. So they integrate with numerals for your tax stuff. They integrate with Mercury for your banking. They integrate with Chase and Amex for the credit card stuff. They also integrate directly with sales channels. So one of their integrations is Amazon as a sales channel. So there's no like you got to pipe it here to pipe it back. It's a direct connection. They also have, I believe, Shopify. I don't think they have Walmart quite yet. They do have TikTok Shop, Shopify, and actually here, let me pull up a few others. Give you a holistic view here. It's a lot. It's really awesome, actually. So stores. Okay, so for stores, they have TikTok, Shopify, Amazon, Woo, Instagram, Facebook, Square, Etsy. Oh, they do have Walmart. Walmart, BigCommerce, eBay. Which eBay is a big one. Faire, Mercari, Squarespace, and Wix. And that's just the stores, by the way. For payments, they have Afterpay, Shopify payments, PayPal, Amazon Pay, Stripe. For banks, this is actually really cool because a lot of them won't integrate directly with like the banks or anything like that. Or they'll do banks, but they won't do like credit cards as often. But this one has Mercury, Amex, Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Capital One, Brex, Payoneer, Wise. They even have lending platforms, which is super cool. So Payability is on here. Amazon Lending is on here. So if you want to factor in your literal Amazon lending into your P&L, done. Not a problem, right? Automated, you're good to go. PayPal working capital if you're taking loans from PayPal. They do have QuickBooks payroll in here as well. They have TaxJar, Numeral. So if you like TaxJar, you have that. Gusto if you pay people, like we use Gusto internally. Bill.com. It's awesome. It's honestly really cool. I think more people should be looking at software that can help them not necessarily just automate, but better streamline the operations. And I like this idea of pick one area of the business, finances, and let's think through optimizing the crap out of that. And then let's move on to the next thing, right? So I recommend doing this with the actual business side, the operations side too, right? Like go look top to bottom on your sourcing process. How can you remove any redundancy? How can you automate things that a human doesn't really need to do? And then how can you optimize the thing so it doesn't take you 2 hours to source 100 units. It can take you 1 hour to source 100 units. And this is kind of your job as the business owner, as the founder, is to go into every single area and basically rip it all down using first principles and build it back up and then be like, cool, that's how we're going to do that. Move on to the next thing. That's honestly the reason why our support and success team is as amazing as they are. Is like, we literally did this. We said ground up, how do we make this perfect? And we do that all the time. Like there's been a lot of cases where I'm like, just burn it all down, think from first principles, and maybe we shouldn't be doing it the way we're doing it now. Things change, right? We learn. Great question though. See, I mean, I literally have no bookkeeping being done at all right now. So this seems like a good enough service to start. LOL. Yeah, it's one of those things where you're like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. I'll deal with it when tax season comes. That's too late, right? We're already in Q2. You should already be thinking about these things. This is the unsexy, although I think it's cool because I'm an ops guy, but this is the unsexy part about being a Amazon seller, right? Like fundamentally, before you're an Amazon seller, you're a business owner and you got to do the business foundational things. And it's not just buying and flipping for high ROI, right? A lot of times it's getting into the nitty gritty of logistics and operations and HR and all these different things. I like that stuff. I think it's really cool because to me, it's the mechanics that make everything else work. It's kind of like this massive machine, right? Sometimes you need to go into each little gadget in the machine and kind of tweak it and remove some stuff, add some new things. Sometimes you got to go in and upgrade your machine, which is kind of fun. See Sean here. We got a lot of questions coming in fast. I love it. Keep it going. I'm jacked right now. Is there any movement going on with Walmart integrations? So from Aura's perspective, we are deeply looking at this. There's a lot of conversations happening kind of in the Walmart's software ecosystem right now that we're having. We're trying to figure out who's kind of going into what direction. How do we integrate with them as well? That way we don't just have Walmart repricing. We also have like deep integrations and different things like that, right? Because what we don't want to have happen is kind of what happened in the Walmart space, which is you have all these little tools popping up. But again, what I already talked about, nobody's building the ecosystem. Nobody's really integrating deeply, making things better. Walmart, we have the unique opportunity now to say, what did we learn as an industry and how could we approach this version of it different, knowing what we know? And that way we can start it off right. So a lot of good conversations happening there. We have a lot of things happening before that. I will say that. Again, another big announcement tomorrow. So look out on social. We're going to go ham on Twitter, email, all the good stuff. So we'll have a lot to share tomorrow. So Kevin's obsessed with Finaloop and I love it. Do you know how it works if I have a bank that doesn't integrate? I don't know how that works. Again, what I would say is most businesses should be using Mercury, to be honest. It's a fantastic bank. FDIC is really high. I know at least for the personal side, gosh, I think it was like 500K FDIC. It was basically double whatever the standard is. So basically they work with banks on the back end. They're a tech company, but most sellers should be using Mercury from my experience. So again, if you're just using what's local to you, you got to stop thinking locally. You got to zoom out and think more globally, not just where you're at now, but where you could go. And I talk about this in that blog post of, deciding on your stack, right? When I say stack, it's really just your collection of software in a given area. So when I say like tech stack, it's like, what language do we use for the front end, the back end, operation, all these things. That's why I call this the financial stack, because it's everything revolving around that. And so you have to make a strategic decision about what tools you use, because it's not just what's available, it's what's available and how does that work in the more macro perspective of the financial stack, right? So don't just pick one thing because it's the best necessarily. Is it the best and adds multiple value once I start to integrate it with all these other things? Again, we want to reduce a lot of that back and forth and wasted motion, if you will. Nice. All right, Isaac, I'm going to take a breather break. Casey, I'm going to let you handle this one.
Yeah. So Isaac, if you're targeting the buy box, trying to acquire the buy box, you're going to want to use what's called our buy box targeting strategy. What's great for you is if you go to build that, it's highlighted as one of our primary strategies in the strategy section. And all of those settings that are already pre-configured, with the exception of the min and max section, we leave that up to you. All of those settings are already pre-configured for our best recommendations for taking the buy box from your competition. So that's going to be repricing below the current buy box winner by 2 cents. Just trying to edge them out there. And then different scenarios, if you want to reprice differently against Amazon themselves, if you want to reprice differently against FBA sellers or seller fulfilled prime sellers, you can set those separate parameters up as well. But those initial settings are our best recommendations, but obviously your business better than we do. So if you want to tweak things, adjust them accordingly, definitely feel free to do so, but you'll want to use the buy box targeting strategy for that.
Yeah, great answer. One thing I we have to transition from how we define and measure success for repricing. Historically, it's been like kind of one of two things. Either, did my sales go up, or is my buy box ownership going up or down, right? And while both those things are good, I can hack either, right? If I want to increase your sales, I can drop your price. I guarantee you, based on economics, I will increase your sales. Also, if I drop your price, I can increase your buy box ownership percentage. With Maven, we said, well, that's really not the way you should be doing this. It's really a more macro perspective. That's why when you're on the specific listings page, if you go down to the performance section, there's 4 charts in a grid, because you need to be able to see the big picture. Just because your buy box ownership percentage went up doesn't necessarily mean that that's a good thing. It sounds good, but not really, because if I'm tanking if your price keeps going down, well, actually you're losing margin. And so your margin went down, but your buy box ownership percentage went up. And so that's why we decided for Maven, we wanted to define success as that balance between sales velocity and profitability, right? We call that the optimal price. And that, by the way, fluctuates. And so how we define success is you plus ideally the buy box as often as possible is at the optimal price, which is funny because let's think about this from like an economics perspective. If we have a price and a bunch of competitors come on, what's going to happen? Well, we're going to have a lot of downward pressure on the price, which is interesting because when we started to calculate the optimal price, we're like, why is it always higher than the buy box? Well, it's because that downward pressure. So what's interesting is Maven's able to relieve that pressure by popping your price up and actually getting sales higher. So in a lot of cases, we're seeing less buy box ownership percentage, but the margin's healthier. And so you're not really giving up much on the velocity side. You might give up a little bit, but the gain you're getting on the margin is greater than what you're giving up on the velocity. And so what's interesting is a lot of people are like, oh, my buy box percentage went down 5%. Yes, but your margins went up 5%. Like, are you happy? Yeah, we're good here, right? So you kind of have to transition. And this is something we're really leaning heavily into on the education and content side, which is like, not just what everybody has always said, here's how you define success. I love when people post, super high buy box ownership percentage numbers on Twitter and stuff. It's really cool and it looks great. But the reality is that's not the whole picture, because their margins could be completely collapsing, and that's not good as a business. So you want to take this more nuanced approach, more macro approach, and say, well, cool, how's the whole trend going here? And if you do that, you'll make far better decisions. That's it. Why we basically bake that into Maven as like a defining success metric. It's super, super important. See Nick here. What do you recommend if it looks like a listing has other sellers with repricers? I've noticed some listings dropping down to min prices very quickly with a buy box strategy. Exactly what I'm saying, right? If everybody is saying, well, what I care about is having more buy box ownership percentage. If we're all optimizing for the same thing, here's what's going to happen. Price goes down straight up. Why? Because the only way to get more buy box ownership percentage is to have a better offer, and a better offer is a lower offer in Amazon's eyes. Now, competitors could leave the listing and that frees up more percentage just based on like a pie kind of concept. But rarely, that's not what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about more competition. That's why we always recommend starting with Maven, because again, that downward pressure you're experiencing, Nick, Maven's going to be able to relieve that pressure by popping you up and still get sales higher. And it's also, in an ideal world, not always the case. You can't control this, but in a lot of cases, when you're doing that, you're pulling the buy box, by the way, in a lot of cases, up with you. This is so interesting. A lot of people think the only way to get the buy box is to go down. And I just said that's basically it. But we've seen that for short periods of time, I can strategically increase your price, keep you in the buy box for a short period of time. And think about this. If everybody's repricing tool is designed to get the buy box, if the buy box goes up and they don't have it, where are they going to go based on repricing? Up. So I can actually raise the margin on the listing in a lot of cases. Now, it depends on how much competition we have and stuff like that, right? But it becomes more possible with Maven, which is really interesting behavior, right? When we launched it, there's a lot of this emergent behavior that we just didn't think would be as frequent as we've seen, like higher margins, like sales raising 10, 30%, $30, $60 in a lot of cases, but it's actually very common. So that's one. And also we're able to pull people up with us too, which is really cool. And that's what's nice is like, because of that game theory model that we operate within, we say, well, we know what all your competition is going to do. So if I know I can raise the price, take the buy box with me, and you're always going to match the buy box, well, I know for a fact that if I go from here to here with the buy box, you're coming with me. So now I can take advantage of it. That's pretty good. So to answer your question, yes, this is the solution. Let's see here. Yeah, really cool stuff. This is why we geek out, by the way, with what we do, because a lot of what we do is very counterintuitive. A lot of what should work doesn't, and a lot of what shouldn't work totally does. And what we have to do as a software company is not operate in what should be. We have to operate in what is true, the facts. What do we see in the data? And then we optimize for that. That can be tough sometimes because, again, it sounds irrational. Like, well, why would you take me out of the buy box? That makes no sense. But when we look at the data, it actually increases performance from a margin perspective and doesn't really decrease on velocity that much. Okay, well, let's do that. So it's really interesting. This is why we love what we do. It's really fun and just super counterintuitive, which is crazy.
And Nick, I would recommend looking up in our help desk article section, the article called Maven's Logic, or how Maven's Logic works.
Yeah.
That'll kind of take you through a handful of scenarios. If someone's pricing under you, how it's going to behave. If someone's matching your price, how it's going to behave there. So that'll kind of give you a good sense as to how Maven initially thinks about initial situations. And then it will obviously adjust based on each specific listing and the current competitive landscape, historical buy box data, all sorts of things like that. But that should help paint a clear initial picture for you.
Yeah. And that's help.goaura.com. All right. So Lucas has a question here. What have you seen in the case that another seller is using Aura and the Maven AI? How has it been able to compete against itself? So basically Maven versus Maven. So in an ideal state, in the sense of there's only two sellers, we're both using Maven, the mins and maxes are roughly the same. What would happen is essentially we would go to the optimal price and just hang out there unless the optimal price fluctuates. Now, that's less likely the case. What most likely happens is there's one person not using Maven in a lot of cases, in which case there's still this competitive externality that we have to factor in. So once that is true, which is, again, like I would argue 8 out of maybe even 9 out of 10 times, maybe even more. I really don't have like good data to back that. I'm just kind of thinking, but in that case, it really just depends on what's the competition doing and all these other different things. But if we're kind of viewing this academically, like we're writing a paper on this for a moment, two sellers, a lot being held constant, all using Maven AI, we're essentially going to go to that optimal price together and we're going to crush it together. That's exactly what's going to happen. See, Kevin here. I was testing a pricing approach that used workflows to switch on a daily basis between Maven and a more aggressive strategy on my listings to increase velocity. Do you have any thoughts on downsides to this? That's actually kind of interesting. So the only downside, I hate saying it depends because that sounds like a cop out, but it does depend. So on listings where there are going to be some listings where you're going to see an increase in velocity, but you're going to be giving up margin. In some cases, that's okay because you have so much inventory. You're like, I really kind of need to move this. It's almost like Maven is your default. Then you have this liquidation strategy. What you're talking about is like somewhere in between. You're kind of oscillating between prioritizing that optimal price and then velocity. And I think that's okay. It depends on the listing. So I wouldn't recommend doing that across your account. If you are and you have awesome data, like please reach out. I want to take a look because that's really interesting. I've yet to hear this kind of concept before. So it's super unique. So I think it would work really well in cases where it would work well. I think as a general rule, it's probably you're giving up too much margin for the velocity. So if you go super deep and you need to move things faster because they're not moving fast enough because you went too deep on things, I think that's going to do really well. On your average listing, you're probably just giving up margin, to be honest. Casey, do you have any thoughts on that?
No initial thoughts on downsides there, Kevin. I would agree with Dylan's initial sentiment that you may be giving up a little bit of that margin for sales velocity depending on that listing in that scenario. The only other thought I had is it may depend on like the timing triggers that you have set up for that test. For example, if you have, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. for one strategy and then flipping back, if you're only selling in the US, naturally those numbers are going to be lower overnight because from, I don't know, let's say 3 a.m. Eastern to 6 a.m. Eastern. That's going to be midnight to 3 a.m. Western. Not as many people are going to be shopping online. So that wouldn't necessarily affect the percentages, but it may affect like the total sales during those times. So maybe just taking into account that time of day, and maybe switching to like a full 24-hour test and flipping back there. That's the only thing that came to mind there, since I know there are people who do shop at 4 a.m., but I would consider the majority of people shop during typical daylight / business hours. So yeah, I would agree with Dylan. And if you're seeing a skew in numbers like with that time range, that'd be the only other thing that comes to mind.
Yeah. One other thing that comes to my mind is I used to have this really strong binary belief, which in hindsight is incorrect, which was you had a lot of people coming from eBay, which is very much the flipping mentality, right? You buy it super low, you hold it as long as you need to get crazy awesome ROI, but like there's no long-term storage fees, anything like that. And obviously the demand on eBay is vastly different than on Walmart. And we saw a lot of sellers do that. They were basically over optimizing for margin and less on velocity, not realizing the opportunity cost was too high. They actually could have made more money by moving things faster. And so for me, I always said, Amazon's a volume game. It's how fast can you move things. And while I still, if that's two ends of the spectrum, I don't really believe anymore that it's purely volume in the way I was positioning or thinking about it, which was how fast can you move things? Because again, how do you move things faster? Well, you have a better offer, blah, 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 right? Lower margins. So it's actually somewhere not necessarily in the middle. It's still closer to the volume because it's clearly a volume game, but it's like a little further away from that end of the spectrum that I thought. And the reason why I've changed my mind on this is because of what I've seen with Maven with that optimal price. Because what I've seen a lot is when sellers go wholesale from rule base, which again is applying that downward pressure, which is compressing the price, lowering the price, to 100% Maven, what I see time and time again is velocity slows down, but margin goes up, which tells me most sellers are operating too aggressively on their pricing. So what's interesting is it's kind of like this law of diminishing return, right? If you're too heavy on velocity, you're giving up way too much margin. But eventually you get to a point where there's a nice optimal, hence the optimal price concept, that you're not giving up nearly enough velocity. You're giving up the right amount of velocity, but you're maximizing your margin relative to that. And so, when I was a seller, can I move it 10 times faster? Well, it's not really the best thought process. It's really, how do I move it in the best way possible? And by the way, how we define the best way does change, which is why the optimal price, the auto maxes, and all these things change on the fly, because the economics, the variables, the demand, the supply on every single listing fluctuates that fast. So we are operating in a world that is incredibly speed oriented. Things just happen so fast because it's all tech, right? We're like, oh, we're retailers, but I mean, let's be frank, right? We're not running brick and mortars here. We're selling things on the internet using algorithms and all these different things. And so because of that, it actually gives you the opportunity to be able to ride and find that optimal wave as best as possible. And so I've really changed my mind on this, because I think if you're one end of either of that same spectrum, you're really giving up something. You're either giving up velocity or margin, and you're here to run a business, right? This is not a hobby for a lot of people. This is not, I flip some things on eBay. This is like a real business. And so you have to be more data driven. What's tough though is a lot of sellers, including myself, like I've really had to like hone this skill, and I'm still, growing and learning here, but like making more data driven decisions. The tough part is you don't have enough time to analyze the data, if you can even get access to the data, because a lot of what we have access to as developers via the API, you don't have access to readily. And so you don't have the time to do it, and one, to analyze it, and two, to make the right decision, because you're not seeing the whole picture. Whereas with what we've built, we're able to see it real time, see the whole picture, all the variables as fast as we can, and we can make those decisions for you. And so that's why we exist, right? Is like, now more than when we launched in December of 2018, right? Like it was super impactful back then, but you didn't have to. You could still do okay and not have a repricer. I knew 7-figure sellers that didn't use it. They're just like, I have a VA who hits match buy box once an hour. Okay, fine. Can't do that anymore. You have to rely on software to be able to pull this off. So Yeah, a lot of things are changing, luckily, and I think in a good way, because again, this is one of the big reasons why we pushed into Aura being available and more accessible for newer sellers, hence the early stage program, but also making like the cutting edge features, Hyperdrive, Maven available to all sellers too, because you just need it, right? For me, repricing, it's like, oh, well, what if I just don't want to? Well, that's fine, but here's an analogy for you. It's like saying we're all NFL players, and the NFL came out and said we're going to allow steroids. Well, all day you can say, well, philosophically, I disagree. I'm not going to do that. Okay, fine. You don't have to. No one's going to force you. But there's a critical mass of players who will, because they want to win. That basically means that you're no longer competing and you basically should just drop out. That's just how it comes down, right? Whether we agree with it or not, it's like we're in a competitive landscape. And if there's a competitive edge that your competition has and you're not utilizing it, that puts you in a bad position. And it's either you do it now or you do it later. And doing it later, unfortunately, ends up costing you tons and tons of time and money. But that's my riff on that. Let's see here. Doug, how often does Maven try to get a listing unsuppressed? Will it keep trying for long-term suppressed listings? Casey, you want to hit that one?
Yeah, Doug. So when a listing becomes suppressed and it is assigned to Maven, if you have this setting checked when you're setting up Maven, it should just be a checkbox. I forget if it's on first or second page there in the strategy builder. But essentially, it's going to slowly drop your price from the price point that you're at when the buy box becomes suppressed. It's going to slowly drop that down and down until either the buy box becomes active or your min price is reached. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dylan, once it reaches your min price, it will keep you there until that buy box is reactivated. So to kind of answer the long-term aspect of your question there, Doug, it will continue to try, but its form of trying is just keeping you at your min price. It's not going to test various price points higher than that because it knows that's not going to reactivate the buy box. So it will function similarly for rules-based strategies as well. If you have a competition type set to only buy box, under the pursuit section, it'll say when a buy box becomes suppressed, it'll typically be set to current price minus 2 cents. That'll function very similarly, dropping that price by that increment until your minutes reached or that buy box is active. And when it does become reactivated, it'll resume repricing, whether it's by Maven's logic or by your assigned strategy settings for a rule-based strategy there.
Yeah, so just kind of jump on that. Rule-based is very much dependent on how you have it set. So if you say, when there's no competition and you're targeting the buy box, hence there's no buy box, you could have that lower your price. I typically say 2 pennies. That's a good standard. We're going to do that every 2 to 3 minutes, essentially, until you reach your min price or you reactivate the buy box, right? In which case we just go back to repricing as normal. If you reach your min price, we're now going to look at the setting which says, when I reach my min price, what do? You may have that set to go to your max price, in which case we'll jump to your max and we'll just keep doing that until we can reactivate it or you sell out. So that's not a great long-term solution. Maven is a little bit more nuanced in how it does that. So it's not as strict, although there's clear behaviors we can utilize. The long-term effect you have to think about is if your min's too high, right? I don't care what kind of repricing strategy, model, tech you're using. It's only going to work within the confines, the limitations that it has, right? Your mins and your maxes. And so Maven will keep fluctuating because we're going to look at the dynamic max. The optimal price can certainly change. Fundamentally, though, if you're finding something that is stuck long-term in a suppressed buy box situation, you're going to have to lower your min price. So if you're not getting sales on it, it's gone, right? Like you just need to go ahead, lower your min price. I would typically recommend going to 0% ROI so we can start moving the inventory. And you can look at Keepa. I think this is a good use of Keepa, right? Look at Keepa, be like, is this a short-term blip? Can I wait it out for a week? Yeah, okay, don't worry about it. If you've seen that it's actually completely tanked and like it's staying there, you've already lost your money. You should go ahead and just liquidate that as fast as you can. So you kind of have to think, is this really like the market has corrected? I need to react to that as a business owner, or is it just a short-term blimp? Somebody drove it down because they're trying to liquidate and I can just wait them out. Okay, cool. That's different. So depending on what scenario you're in, I would kind of tweak my behavior in terms of like what I decide to do there. And I think you'll be okay. But it will continue to attempt. It's just, if it can't technically do it because the math and all that stuff, then, whether you're using Maven or rule base in that scenario is almost irrelevant, because no matter what, it's just you're kind of in an uncompetitive range. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, great questions though. I like these. This is awesome. I feel like we're really diving into some deep stuff here, Casey.
Yeah, it's been it was interesting. A lot that I didn't get a chance to read your blog posts around like the financial recommendations or financial side tech stack, if you will. But yeah, it was good to see people kind of jump in on that. I myself need to do a little better job on the personal finance side, so I may be looking at some of those tools as well.
Because I recently got married and Mercury's coming out with personal banking. I literally wrote out my banking stack because I'm about to tweak it. Because things should be simple, right? Finances, stuff like that shouldn't be complicated. I say this as a finance major. You should make it as simple and automated as possible. But that's really difficult to do as a business because you have so much variations, right? You have when you're pulling a salary and you're like, cool, I'm every paycheck is $2,000. Cool. You could it's a fixed thing. As a business owner, it's so very different, especially when you're running the finances of the business, because ideally you're growing. And so, yeah, you could take this profit first, Mike Michalowicz perspective, which is like, we just take this percentage and it always goes there. I think that's phenomenal. That way, as you're growing, so are your accounts. But a lot of sellers don't do that. A lot of sellers don't sit down to really think about, how do I make financial decisions in the business? How do I know how much to take out, reinvest, all these different things? They just kind of go, well, I got 50 grand in the bank. What do I do with it? It's not the best time to make that decision. The best time to make that decision is when you're looking at your financial operations and you're thinking less emotionally, because a lot of sellers are like, well, I can pull that out. That's another Rolex right there, right? You don't want to be doing that, right? You want to be able to look at your profit account and be like, cool, there's 10 grand in there. That's Rolex. I want to take that. Great, do it. That's fine. But it doesn't negatively impact anything else. A lot of sellers are too flying by the seat of their pants kind of philosophy, right? Where they're just making ad hoc decisions left and right instead of thinking down and saying, what are the principles here? What are the rules that I follow? And you can always change the rules. That's cool, right? But you sit down and you think it through, you do your research, find best practices, you apply that for 3-6 months, and you pause and say, great, is this still serving me? Am I getting what I need? Is there any tweaks I need to make? Make those tweaks and get back at it, right? You're able to automate things, even if it's not technically automated where like transactions are automatically occurring. You at least have this checklist, this process that whenever you go to sit down to manage the finances of the business, it's not overwhelming. It's just, I do X, Y, and Z. And heck, you can even give that to somebody else to manage if you needed to, right? Like a bookkeeper could do that for you. You could say, I want to set up profit first. Here's how I do it. You deal with the transactions every week, every month, whatever. Makes it so much easier, and you know exactly what's going to happen. And you can also predict, right? You can project out where we're going to be at if our growth rate's 10% per month. Run the math in Excel. That's how much profit you're going to have. That's how much tax money you're going to have in 6 months. Easy, nice and easy. I say that having a bachelor's degree in finance, though. I actually very much dislike accounting and corporate finance. That's so boring to me. I like the investing, private equity, investment banking kind of side of things because it sounds way more sexy. But the corporate finance, taxes, accounting is not the most enjoyable thing for me. When you get into like tax optimization, it's interesting, but it's also such a pain in the butt because it's like, oh, I could do this thing and that'd be awesome. They're like, well, yeah, but you got to change this thing over here that fundamentally changes everything. You're like, awesome. So how does that work?
Yeah, I was as the son of a banker, I was never very savvy with accounting and things like that. I think that was probably one of the lowest grades I got in my college career was an accounting class that I was required to take for my math.
That's hard though.
Requirement or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was supposedly the easiest math class I could have taken at a college level, but I don't know if I fully agree with that based on the result. And yeah, for those thinking that I wasn't good at math, I was very good at math all throughout high school, and accounting just did not line up for whatever reason.
Yeah. So. I had to take accounting 1. That was incredibly, it's considered a filter course for accounting majors. So difficult. That and foreign finance. Goodness gracious. That teacher was tenured, coolest guy ever from Denmark. And he's like, you got one exam. You show up, cool. If you don't, whatever, you got one exam and it was 4 questions. Oh. And he's like, you either pass or you fail this sucker. So that was fun when somebody walked in clearly inebriated to the final. I was like, oh, you have not been here this whole semester and nothing's online. So good luck with that, sir. I don't think he passed that class.
I would bet not.
Let's see, Kevin, have you guys seen a good software for saving receipts and invoices? I was hoping to simplify my record keeping. Good question, actually. So you can scan it. You can use like a scan app on your phone and then just have it. I think I use ScanBot is what it's called, but basically you can have it set up so whenever you scan something, you can name it and then just save it to like a Google Drive as an example for record keeping there. What's cool is this is Mercury specific and it's not for record keeping, but if you have like an invoice, you can actually drag the invoice into Mercury. It'll parse it and be like, oh, cool. You need to pay X to this person. Just say pay and like we're done here. So if it's just for record keeping, I would go digital, obviously, and I would just scan it. Get a scanner. If you're doing like the crazy long Target things, I would probably get an actual like physical scanner, not use your phone on that. But yeah, I just date it, name it, find some kind of syntax, like a naming kind of structure that is really easy for you to be able to search and find things when you need to. Just save it in Google Drive, honestly. That way, if you ever need to, you got it ready to go.
Yeah, no recommendations for you there, Kevin.
Yeah,
I do not. No, I was just going to say I use taking pictures on my phone, Venmo, and my credit card statement to pretty much line everything out. So definitely very unofficial process, Kevin. Hopefully you can find a good one to recommend us as well.
Another thing you can do, which we like to do internally, is if there's a email me, send it to your email. You know, now you technically always have a record of it. Not as great, but it's good. It's a good fallback. That's less friction. It's funny. I keep hearing you say "son of a banker, man," and it sounds like a country song. So I keep like it sounds. What is that? A Dolly Parton song? Son of a. I don't know. It's something like that.
Yeah, I've had a lot of exposure to country music growing up in New Hampshire, but no banking songs come to mind. And I can
They're
confirm
usually anti-banker.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah. And I can confirm the banking world is a boring place to operate in. I was a teller for one summer and quickly decided I would not have a future in the banking industry.
Yeah, the banking side sounds less interesting. It's the whole like Wall Street, we're going to close a $10 billion deal. It sounds cool. And you're going to get 1% of that as commission. Yeah. That sounds cool, but the 100-hour week sounded intense once everybody, granted, we had started Aura my sophomore year, I think, in college. So, but when everybody was going for internships, like, oh, where are you going to go? I was like, nowhere. I'm just going to graduate and keep working on this. So it's funny. I submitted I got a video. My wife recorded it. She was there. I submitted my last paper and was like, I'm done. And literally went back to answering support tickets. Because I think it was just James and I at that time. Actually, no, Finn was on by then. Yeah. Finn had joined us by then. So, but it was very anticlimactic and it was peak COVID. So I didn't get to walk or anything. I had already like rented all the things and they're like, hey, you can walk on Zoom. I was like, that sounds ridiculous. I won't be doing that. Thank you though. Yeah. So appreciate it. It's funny. I feel like the Amazon world has so many different archetypes, people coming from different professions coming in. And what's so cool about that is everybody has such a unique view, right? Different strengths and weaknesses and stuff like that. And so if you can take the strengths from your previous career or what have you, which now a lot of people are just quitting college to do this. So like you still got skills, but you know what I mean? But if you could take those and apply it here in a unique way, that becomes a pretty strong competitive advantage that I think a lot of people are trying to run away from what they've experienced because they hated that job, that career, whatever. But really think about like what makes you unique because of that experience, that job, that career, and apply it here, whether it's finance, operations, it doesn't matter. Could even be connections, right? You have a lot of people coming from a highly connected world and they're trying to go into wholesale and they're like, I can't find suppliers. I'm like, well, don't you already know like 30 from your past career? Just call them up. You already got the relationship. They're more likely to sell to you than anybody else. You kind of got to be a little more nimble when you're going into a new industry.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we got about 11-ish minutes here, so we're going to start wrapping up. But any questions that we haven't answered? Man, this one flew by. Appreciate everybody joining us and giving us the awesome comments here and questions. This has been phenomenal for us. Got to dive into a lot of different things. But any additional questions? Again, this is open office hours, meaning there's no strict process here. It's really just Casey and I jump in, answer any questions you have, whether that's about, repricing or the product, being a seller, anything kind of meta as well. But we're happy to dive deeper into anything else. See Dylan. Or here, this one. How's that seller board integration coming? Trying to work on it. I know they're wrapping up a few things on their end. It is an open conversation. They're wrapping up a lot on their end for some other stuff. So it's going to take a little bit longer than we had anticipated, but that's all good. See, Doug, can you explain the basics of workflows? Casey, you want to hit that?
Yeah. So in short, Doug, workflows are a great way to just automate a handful of tasks that you would typically do manually within Aura. The most common example is going to be automatically assigning new listings assigning new listings a strategy and enabling repricing. So you can just remove that from your daily workflow. I recommend checking out our help articles. We have one specifically for that. You can set it up as a trigger either on a schedule. For new listing, it would be a new listings trigger, and you can have it filter out based on whether it's a couple identifying characters in the SKU or all new listings you want to assign to a specific strategy there. One note is if you are doing that, I would recommend not having them all assigned to Maven, just because Maven does have a certain limit of listings that you can assign to it. So if you ever hit that limit, any further listings won't be assigned that strategy. And then the other most common example, Doug, is some folks will pause repricing on their listings and hold them or move them to their max for a certain amount of time. Some folks will do that to make sure their prices don't get quote unquote stale on any listings or stuck at any point. We do also have a specific help article for that. But that's going to be kind of the basics of workflows. You can reassign strategies, enable repricing, pause repricing on a set schedule, and then also assign new listings to a strategy, enable repricing for those ones as well. But definitely check out those couple help articles if you are just one thought that's coming to mind is if you are using any filter blocks to filter out certain listings or do certain things with specific listings, after the filter block, you want to click and drag the next function to the right side of the screen. So quote unquote, nest it to the right side of your screen. Just that is what is going to make that filter properly apply to those following steps. But definitely check out our help articles. We've got a decent handful of ones specifically on workflows, whether it's best practices, typical ways to use them. And they should be pretty clear, but if not, always feel free to come chat with me or Finn in the chat function. We'll give you a hand.
Yeah. So dark mode is coming along well. We actually just did a lot of, call it design refactoring on the back end to be able to do this. So it is coming along. It's not highest priority right now. I will say that we have a lot of more milestone things we're working on, but we are working on this in parallel. So we all want dark mode and to be keyboard led. So command palette, all that good stuff. Let's see, Christopher, possible to add in a days in stock counter feature. Would start counting once listing is active and in stock, not backordered. It's possible. So what I would say, we may already have this requested. If you go to, where's my feedback? Did it get removed? Here it is. Okay, cool. If you go to feedback.goaura.com, go ahead and search to see if that's already added there so you can add comments and upvote. That way you know once we start working on it. If you don't see it, go ahead and add a comment there as a user. That way you can keep track. We can see it as a team. Again, we sit down every Thursday as a team to review all this to see what we need to prioritize.
And one workaround in the meantime there, Chris, if you're on your listings page, if you scroll to the right side, there is going to be an age of inventory counter that'll separate out into separate buckets. So you'll be able to see if you have X number of units in the 0 to 30 days, more units 31 to 60. It won't be as specific as, hey, this has been in stock for 24 days, but you will get a good sense of those general buckets and where that stock lies for now.
Yeah. Let's see here. Are you ever going to add 90-day results or year results? Yes. So actually, if you go to feedback.goaura.com, one of the things that is, it's either in progress or planned status, basically being able to add way more of a data range for a lot of the things. So yeah, this is something we're heavily looking at. See, low inventory fee breakdown, progress from last week, office hours. Casey, I know you've been working on this a lot. There's been a lot of interesting tidbits here.
Yeah, John. So I don't have any specific details for you. Looking into it with our head engineer, James, and also one of the co-founders, James, he is going to look deeper into how Amazon is currently sending us that fee. That appears to, based on your notes in chat, I believe, with me a couple times and a few other users, they are sending us that fee, and it is being calculated correctly based on what we've seen. So that is an update that has been pushed out by their team on their end. So unfortunately, we don't have more insight into the specific details of how they're calculating it, where it takes into effect on certain price points or things like that. And even, I'm not sure if it was with you, John, or another chatter, that there was a screenshot that James had sent me when he initially started to look into it, and Amazon's own calculator wasn't even calculating the fees properly. The math at the top said $45 and the bottom line said $60 in fees. So it is going to be a little bit of a work in progress for us to see how that's being calculated. But once James is able to kind of take a real deep dive into the specifics of that fee and how it's being sent to us via Amazon, I'm sure we'll write up whether it's some sort of documentation, or I'll also, I do have your name down on a list. So I will reach out to you directly via email once I do have some more insight for you as well.
Yeah, this is one of those cases where, and I highlighted this on a webinar yesterday, where some things as a developer should be pretty straightforward or should be documented, and they're just not. And there's no rational way for us to just make assumptions. We have to go test a bunch of stuff, which obviously takes time. Hopefully, honestly, we didn't think that they were going to be including it the way that they are. And now they kind of are, but it's also like not necessarily correct in some cases. So again, to prior, I think, office hours, or maybe it was a live talking about this particular topic. This is why we don't rush things like this, because there's so many things in flux that you run the risk of over optimizing for users in a way that's not 100% true. We've just seen glimmers of it, or we solve it in one way, and then Amazon's like, just kidding, we've been running a bunch of testing, we're going to do this other way. And now you wasted a bunch of time and you have to pull it. Small and Light was not a great example of this, but by the time we were rebuilding, we're like, oh, let's do Small and Light fees. They're like, just kidding, that's gone. It's low price, or low price now. So we try to be hesitant to make sure we're not wasting time and effort on things that are still really in flux. But we were heavily talking with the Amazon developer community to see like what's happening, what are they talking about. It's just sometimes you're flying blind, which is really frustrating for us when we're trying to help sellers and users out, and we're just like, yeah, they're not telling us what's happening, and it's not necessarily clear yet. So the moment we have like true, we know for a fact what's happening, or Amazon's confirmed anything, or we see something that's happening 100% of the time, that's when we'll start to kind of think through solutions there that make the most sense. Still an ongoing thing. Welcome to Amazon, right? And John, I know you and I have talked, so you've been around long enough to know kind of how that works. Nice. So that brings us up to time. Again, we appreciate everybody jumping in here. This has been a fantastic session. Lots of engagement, lots of comments, lots of questions. Time went by super fast, which is really exciting. That means I talked way too much. We do this every Wednesday from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. EST for free. We just want to be able to have this level of feedback and conversations with our users to make sure we're, answering the deep questions that our users have. Obviously, don't wait for next week to ask us questions. Go directly to support, talk with Casey, talk with Finn, whoever's online at that time. And, again, we appreciate everybody coming. We'd love to see you again next week. But with that, we will let everybody get back to the rest of their day and get back to sourcing. Awesome. Casey, any last words?
No, that's all. Have a good week, folks. We'll see you on Wednesday of next week.
Awesome.